Boy found locked box buried in backyard. What his grandpa revealed left him speechless. The rusty shovel scraped against something that definitely wasn't dirt. Noah wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve, leaving a muddy streak across his skin. It was supposed to be a simple Saturday morning. Help Grandpa Thomas clear out the old garden bed behind the house, maybe earn $20 for the movies later. Instead, he'd been digging for 2 hours in the scorching July heat, wrestling with roots that seemed determined to strangle his shovel. "Grandpa, I think I hit a rock or something," Noah called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Thomas looked up from where he was pulling weeds near the back fence. At 78, his grandfather moved slowly but deliberately, each motion careful and measured. His weathered hands, permanently stained with decades of engine grease from his mechanic days, paused their work. "Just dig around it, son. Sometimes the earth holds onto things longer than it should." Noah frowned at the odd response but shrugged it off. Grandpa had been saying strange things lately. Mom said it was just age catching up with him. He adjusted his grip on the shovel and dug deeper, working around the edges of whatever lay beneath. The metallic scraping grew louder. This wasn't a rock. "It's definitely something metal," Noah muttered, dropping to his knees and using his hands to brush away the packed earth. His fingers traced the edges of what felt like a box, rectangular, about the size of a thick book, but heavier. Much heavier. The dirt came away in clumps, revealing patches of rust-eaten metal and what might have once been green paint. Noah's heart started beating faster. Every 13-year-old dreams of finding buried treasure, but this felt different. Real. The box had a small, corroded lock on the front, and the weight suggested it wasn't empty. "Grandpa!" Noah's voice cracked with excitement. "Come look at this!" Thomas's footsteps stopped. When Noah glanced back, his grandfather stood frozen near the tomato plants, his face drained of color. But Noah was too focused on his discovery to notice. He worked his fingers under the box, trying to lift it from its earthen tomb. The thing must have been buried for years, decades even. The soil around it was packed hard, as if it had been compressed by countless seasons of rain and snow. "What is it, Noah?" Thomas's voice sounded strange, almost hollow. "Some kind of old box. It's locked, but maybe we can." The box came free suddenly, sending Noah tumbling backward. He scrambled to his feet, cradling his find like a newborn baby. Up close, he could see more details, a few dents in the metal, a manufacturer's stamp too faded to read, and that stubborn lock that looked like it hadn't been opened in forever. Thomas appeared at his shoulder, moving faster than Noah had seen him move in months. When the old man's eyes fell on the box, something flickered across his face. Recognition? Fear? Noah couldn't tell. "Where exactly did you find this?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Right here, about 3 feet down. It was sitting in this little pocket of softer dirt." Noah turned the box over in his hands, examining every inch. "Do you think someone buried it on purpose? Like pirates or something?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the box with an intensity that made Noah uncomfortable, as if he was seeing a ghost. "Grandpa? You okay?" Thomas blinked, seeming to come back to himself. "Fine, son. Just surprised, I guess. Let's take it inside. Your grandmother would never forgive me if you got heat stroke out here." They made their way to the back porch, Noah chattering excitedly about possible contents while Thomas remained silent. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he held the screen door open. Noah assumed it was just the heat. In the cool darkness of the basement workshop, Noah set the box on Thomas's workbench, right next to the collection of rusty tools and old coffee cans filled with screws and bolts. The fluorescent light overhead cast harsh shadows, making the box look even more mysterious. "So how do we open it?" Noah asked, running his thumb over the corroded lock. "Do you have any bolt cutters?" Thomas stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the stairway light. "Maybe we should leave it alone, Noah. Some things are buried for good reasons." "Are you kidding? This is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me." Noah was already rummaging through the tool collection. Besides, whoever buried it is probably long gone by now. Finders keepers, right? He found a sturdy screwdriver and a small hammer. The lock looked old and weak. A few good hits should do the trick. Noah, wait! But the teenager was already positioning the screwdriver against the lock's shackle. 3 sharp taps with the hammer, and the rusted metal gave way with a satisfying snap. The lid opened with a creak that seemed to echo in the small workshop. Noah's excitement died in his throat. Inside the box, nestled against what looked like old newspapers, was a leather-bound ledger. The cover was stained with something dark, something that had dried to a rusty brown color decades ago. Next to it lay several yellowed pieces of paper covered in shaky handwriting, and underneath everything was a newspaper clipping so old it looked ready to crumble at a touch. But it was the smell that hit him first, metallic and stale, like old pennies left in a jar. With trembling fingers, Noah lifted out the newspaper clipping. The headline was still readable despite the years. Payroll truck robbery leaves guard injured, $80,000 missing. The date stamped showed July 15, 1972. Holy! Noah breathed, his eyes scanning the brief article. Grandpa, look at this. There was a robbery, and they never caught the guys who did it. The money was never found either. He looked up, expecting to see his grandfather's amazement. Instead, Thomas stood motionless in the doorway, his face gray as ash. Grandpa? Thomas's lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes were fixed on the ledger, on those dark stains that Noah was beginning to realize might not be rust after all. This is incredible, Noah continued, carefully lifting one of the handwritten papers. These look like IOUs or something. M. Grady owes $500. L. Martinez owes $750. There's a whole list of them. Thomas stepped forward, his movements mechanical, like a man walking toward his own execution. He reached out with one weathered finger and touched the edge of the ledger. You don't understand, he whispered. Understand what? Thomas looked at his grandson, really looked at him, and Noah saw something in those familiar brown eyes that he'd never seen before. Guilt. Raw, decades-old guilt that had been eating away at the old man like acid. I know whose box this is, Thomas said quietly. Noah's blood went cold. What do you mean you know? Thomas sank into the old metal chair beside the workbench, suddenly looking every one of his 78 years. His hands shook as he reached for the ledger, and when he opened it to the first page, Noah saw more of those dark stains scattered across the lined paper. Because I'm the one who buried it. The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Noah stared at his grandfather, the man who had taught him to ride a bike, who made pancakes every Sunday morning, who had never so much as raised his voice in anger. That's not funny, Grandpa. I'm not trying to be funny. Thomas's voice was hollow, defeated. Sit down, Noah. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told your mother years ago. Noah remained standing, the newspaper clipping still clutched in his hands. The workshop felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Outside, a car door slammed, and he could hear his mother's voice calling out that she was back from the grocery store. Normal sounds from a normal Saturday afternoon. But nothing about this moment felt normal anymore. Thomas opened the ledger to a page covered in careful handwriting. His handwriting, Noah realized with a start. Numbers and dates and names, all recorded in the same methodical script his grandfather used for grocery lists and birthday cards. July 16, 1972, Thomas read aloud. The day after the robbery. The day I wrote down everyone who owed me money for keeping quiet. Noah's legs gave out, and he collapsed into the old folding chair across from the workbench. You're serious. Dead serious. Thomas looked up, and Noah saw tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. I was 26 years old, working as a mechanic, barely making enough to keep food on the table. When some men came to me asking for help with their car, offering good money for a simple favor, I didn't ask the right questions. What kind of favor? Thomas closed the ledger and leaned back in his chair. They said they needed a driver. Someone clean, someone who wouldn't attract attention. They told me it was for a poker game, Late night, out of town, needed someone reliable to get them there and back. Noah's mouth was dry. But it wasn't a poker game. No, Thomas whispered. It wasn't. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting its harsh glow on 2 generations of the same family, separated by secrets that had been buried in the backyard for over 50 years. And Noah realized that finding the box was just the beginning. That evening, after Noah's mother had gone to bed and the house had settled into its familiar nighttime creaks, Thomas knocked softly on his grandson's bedroom door. "Can't sleep either?" the old man asked, finding Noah sitting on his bed, staring at the lockbox they'd moved to his desk. Noah shook his head. All afternoon, he'd replayed their conversation in the workshop, hoping somehow he'd misunderstood. But the box sat there like a silent witness, its dark stains visible even in the dim light from his desk lamp. Thomas eased himself into the chair at Noah's desk, his joints protesting audibly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas reached out and opened the ledger to the first page. "I was a different person then," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Young, broke, invisible. Your grandmother and I had been married 2 years, and she was pregnant with your mother. The garage I worked at paid barely enough to cover rent." Noah pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them. "So when these men came to you, they weren't strangers," Thomas interrupted. "That's what made it worse. Jimmy Torino and his crew, I'd known them since high school. Jimmy was the kind of guy who always had money in his pocket, always had an angle. When he walked into my garage that night, flashing a roll of bills, I should have known better." Thomas turned the page, revealing more names and numbers in his careful script. "He said they needed someone clean to drive them to a high-stakes poker game up in Millville. 50 miles out, 50 miles back. $200 for one night's work, more money than I made in 2 weeks. But you knew it wasn't really poker." Thomas's laugh was bitter. "Part of me knew. But I needed that money so badly, I convinced myself not to ask questions. Jimmy said to meet them at the truck stop on Route 9 at midnight, engine running, no questions asked." Noah felt sick. The newspaper clipping had mentioned Route 9. That's where the payroll truck had been hit. "I waited in the parking lot for 20 minutes, Thomas continued. Kept telling myself it was just a card game. Then I heard the shouting, the gunshot, and Jimmy came running out with 2 other guys I'd never seen before carrying a canvas bag. The stolen money. $80,000 in cash." Thomas's hands trembled as he spoke. "They jumped in my car, screaming at me to drive. I was so scared, so confused. The guard, they said he tried to be a hero, pulled a gun. Jimmy's friend Marcus had shot him in the shoulder, not fatal but enough to put him down." Noah's stomach churned. A real person had been hurt. This wasn't some adventure story. Someone's father, someone's son had bled because his grandfather had been behind the wheel. "I drove them to an abandoned farmhouse outside town," Thomas went on. "That's when everything went wrong. They started arguing about the split, about who deserved what. Marcus wanted half because he'd done the shooting. Jimmy said he'd planned everything, he deserved the biggest cut. The third guy, Pete Kowalski, just kept counting and recounting the money." Thomas flipped to another page in the ledger, pointing to an entry stained with something dark. "That's when Pete got greedy. He tried to take more than his share while the others weren't looking. Jimmy caught him, and they started fighting right there in my garage." "Your garage?" "They'd followed me home, demanded I hide them until the heat died down. I was too scared to say no." Thomas's voice cracked. "Pete pulled a knife, Jimmy grabbed a wrench from my workbench. There was so much blood." Noah stared at the stains on the page with new horror. "Did someone die?" "No, but Pete nearly did. Lost so much blood he passed out right there on my workshop floor." Thomas closed his eyes, lost in the memory. "That's when I realized what I'd become part of. I wasn't just a driver anymore. I was an accessory to robbery, attack, maybe attempted crime. What happened to the money?" Thomas opened the ledger to the back pages, where neat rows of numbers filled the lines. "They split it 3 ways, but they were paranoid about keeping it together. Each man took his share and scattered. But Jimmy left me with something, $15,000 in cash, sitting right there in my car trunk. He gave you $15,000? Blood money, Thomas said firmly. He said it was for keeping quiet, for cleaning up the mess in my garage, for being their alibi if anyone asked questions. I wanted to refuse it, but you needed it. Thomas nodded, tears finally spilling down his weathered cheeks. Your grandmother was having complications with the pregnancy. The hospital bills were piling up. We were about to lose our apartment. That blood money, it saved us. Paid for your mother's delivery, bought us this house, gave us a fresh start. Noah looked around his bedroom. At the walls his mother had painted when they moved in, at the window that looked out over the garden where the box had been buried. Everything he'd known about his family, his home, his history was built on stolen money. The others, Noah said quietly, pointing to the IOUs. What happened to them? Jimmy disappeared within a week. Heard he went to California, changed his name. Pete recovered and skipped town too. But Marcus... Thomas's voice hardened. Marcus got cocky. Started flashing money around, buying drinks for everyone at Murphy's bar, telling stories about his big score. Someone figured it out. The police connected him to the truck stop robbery within a month. But when they arrested him, he tried to make a deal, said he'd give up his accomplices if they reduced his sentence. Thomas tapped the ledger. That's when I started keeping track of who owed me for staying quiet. Marcus, Jimmy, Pete, they all knew I could identify them, could put them at the scene. So they paid you to keep your mouth shut. For a while. The money in this ledger, it's all hush money. Payments to ensure I'd never tell anyone what really happened that night. Thomas's voice turned bitter. But they didn't need to worry. I was too much of a coward to confess, too afraid of losing everything I'd built with their blood money. Noah stared at his grandfather, seeing him with completely new eyes. Not the gentle man who taught him to fish, but a young, desperate person who'd made one terrible choice that had echoed through 50 years. Why are you telling me this now? Thomas looked at his grandson with eyes full of regret and love. Because keeping secrets eats you alive, Noah. I've carried this guilt for 51 years, and it's poisoned everything good in my life. You deserve to know the truth about where you come from, about what built this family. Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance, and both of them froze. But it passed by, heading towards some other emergency, some other family's crisis. Noah didn't answer. He couldn't. His grandfather, his hero, was a criminal. And Noah had no idea what to do with that truth. The next morning, Noah couldn't look at the family photos lining the hallway without feeling sick. There was his mother as a baby, cradled in Thomas's young arms outside the very house Noah was standing in. The house bought with stolen money. Every happy memory felt tainted now. He pushed eggs around his plate at breakfast, barely listening as his mother, Sarah, chattered about her plans for the day. She was meeting with contractors about renovating the house, turning the basement into a rental apartment to help pay for Noah's private high school tuition. The Hendersons down the street are getting $1,200 a month for their basement unit, she said excitedly, refilling Noah's orange juice. If we can pull in even $1,000, that's your tuition covered right there. Noah's stomach clenched. More blood money. The cycle continuing into another generation. Mom, he started then stopped. How do you tell your mother that her childhood home was built on a crime? That every family dinner, every Christmas morning, every proud moment had happened in a house paid for with stolen cash? What is it, honey? You look pale. Nothing. Just tired. Thomas sat silently at the end of the table, picking at his toast. The man who had seemed smaller somehow since his confession. When their eyes met, Noah saw the same question reflected there: what happens now? After breakfast, Noah escaped to his room, claiming he had summer reading to catch up on. Instead, he sat staring at the lockbox, his mind racing with impossible calculations. If the house was worth $200,000 now, and it had been bought with $15,000 in stolen money in 1972, what did that mean? Was the whole house tainted, or just a percentage? His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend Jake. "Want to hang out? New skateboard to show you." Noah stared at the message. Jake's family lived in a normal house, probably bought with normal money earned at normal jobs. Jake's biggest worry was whether he'd make varsity soccer next year. He had no idea how lucky that was. By afternoon, Noah couldn't stand being in the house anymore. Every room felt like evidence of a crime. The hardwood floors Thomas had installed himself in 1975. The kitchen renovated with money from those early hush payments. Even Noah's own bedroom, painted last year with rental income from the upstairs apartment his parents had created. He walked downtown to the public library, needing to be somewhere that felt clean, untouched by his family's secret. The building was old but honest, built with tax money and donations, not blood money. In the local history section, Noah found himself gravitating toward newspapers from 1972. The librarian, Mrs. Chin, helped him access the microfiche archives, and soon he was scrolling through headlines from that summer, searching for more details about the robbery. The injured guard's name was Robert Martinez. He was 24 years old, married with a baby daughter. The bullet had shattered his shoulder, ending his career in security, and leaving him with permanent nerve damage. The article mentioned a fundraiser organized by local churches to help with his medical bills. Noah's hands shook as he read. This wasn't some faceless victim. This was a real person whose life had been changed forever because his grandfather had been desperate enough to drive a getaway car. He kept reading, finding follow-up articles over the following months. Robert Martinez had struggled to find work after his injury. His wife had taken a second job at a diner. They'd eventually moved away from town, seeking a fresh start somewhere cheaper. The final article Noah found was from 1973. Local family loses home despite community fundraising efforts. The Martinez family had been foreclosed on, unable to keep up with mortgage payments on reduced income. Noah sat back in his chair, the weight of realization crushing his chest. While his grandfather had used stolen money to buy a house and start a family, the robbery's victim had lost his home, his career, his future. The moral math was simple and devastating. He printed the articles and walked home slowly, his mind churning with questions he couldn't answer. As he turned onto his street, he saw the contractor trucks parked outside his house. Through the living room window, he could see his mother pointing excitedly at something, probably explaining her vision for the rental unit. Inside, the house buzzed with activity. 2 contractors were measuring the basement, while his mother took notes. Thomas sat in his recliner, looking older and more fragile than ever. "Noah!" Sarah called out when she saw him. "Perfect timing. Come see what Mr. Rodriguez thinks we can do with the basement." The contractor, a friendly man with paint-stained clothes, gestured toward the space. "With some drywall, new flooring, and a separate entrance, you'll have a beautiful one-bedroom unit. Should rent easily in this neighborhood. The income will be a game-changer," Sarah said, squeezing Noah's shoulder. "Finally, we can afford to send you to St. Augustine Prep. You'll get such a better education there, honey. Better opportunities, better future." Noah felt like he was drowning. His mother was so proud, so excited about providing for his future. She had no idea that everything she was planning was built on stolen foundations. That evening, after the contractors left and his mother had called 3 friends to share her renovation plans, Noah found himself alone with Thomas in the garden. The old man was pulling weeds from the spot where the lockbox had been buried, as if trying to erase the evidence. "She doesn't know," Noah said quietly. Thomas shook his head. "I could never tell her. It would destroy her. But we know." "Yes," Thomas whispered. "We know." Noah knelt beside his grandfather, helping pull weeds in silence. The earth felt different beneath his hands now, not like home soil, but like a graveyard where secrets were buried. "The guard who got shot," Noah said finally. "Robert Martinez. I looked him up. He lost his house because of what happened. His family had to start over with nothing." Thomas's hand stilled. "I didn't know his name. He was only 2 years younger than you were. Had a baby daughter, just like you were about to. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared guilt and unspoken questions. Finally, Thomas sat back on his heels and looked at his grandson. "What do you think we should do?" Noah had been dreading that question all day, but now that it was asked, he realized he'd been preparing his answer since the moment he'd read about Robert Martinez's foreclosure. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "But I know we can't just pretend this never happened." Above them, the lights in the house glowed warmly, and Noah could see his mother through the kitchen window, already planning their bright, stolen future. 3 days later, Noah returned to the library with a different purpose. He couldn't shake the feeling that there were more pieces to this puzzle, more people affected by that night in 1972. The names in the ledger haunted him: Jimmy Torino, Pete Kowalski, Marcus Chin, and especially M. Grady, whose IOUs totaled more than anyone else's. Mrs. Chin helped him access the town records from the 1970s, and Noah began cross-referencing the names from his grandfather's ledger with newspaper archives, police reports, and city directories. Most of the men had vanished without a trace after 1972, but one name kept appearing in unexpected places: Michael Mick Grady. Unlike the others, Grady hadn't disappeared. According to the records, he'd stayed in town, working various odd jobs through the late 70s and 80s. But what caught Noah's attention was a pattern in the local church bulletins from 1985 onward. Mick Grady listed as head custodian at St. Mary's Catholic Church. A criminal-turned-church employee seemed like an odd career change. Noah walked the 6 blocks to St. Mary's, his backpack heavy with photocopied documents. The church was a modest brick building with a small cemetery behind it, surrounded by oak trees that had probably been there since before the robbery. Inside, the afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across empty pews. Noah found a middle-aged priest arranging flowers near the altar. "Excuse me, Father? I'm doing research on local history, and I wondered if you knew anything about a former custodian here named Mick Grady?" Father Sullivan looked up with interest. "Mick? Of course I knew him. Wonderful man. Worked here for over 30 years before he passed." "Why do you ask?" "I'm trying to understand what kind of person he was." "For a school project," Noah lied, hating how easily the deception came. "Well, come with me then. I can show you something that might interest you." The priest led Noah to a small memorial garden behind the church, where a simple stone bench sat beneath a maple tree. A brass plaque was mounted on the backrest, slightly green with age. "In memory of Michael Grady," Noah read aloud, "and his dedication to rebuilding lives quietly." Mick insisted on that particular wording, Father Sullivan said with a smile. "He was very specific about it. Rebuilding lives quietly. That was his mission, you could say." "What did he do exactly?" "Oh, everything. Maintained the building, organized food drives, ran our job placement program for people getting out of prison. But his real passion was helping folks who'd made mistakes get back on their feet." The priest sat on the bench, gesturing for Noah to join him. "Mick had quite a past himself, you know. Never talked about the details, but he'd clearly been on the wrong side of the law in his younger days." Noah's pulse quickened. "Did he ever mention anything about the early 70s? Maybe about some trouble he'd been involved in?" Father Sullivan studied Noah more carefully. "That's a very specific question for a school project. Is there something particular you're looking for?" Noah felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm researching an old robbery case. The payroll truck that was hit in 1972. I think Mick Grady might have been connected to it." "Ah." The priest nodded slowly. "You're Thomas Brennan's grandson, aren't you? I can see the resemblance." The words hit Noah like a physical blow. "You know my grandfather?" "Known Thomas for years. He's been coming to confession here since the early 80s, though he stopped attending Mass regularly after his arthritis got bad." Father Sullivan's expression grew thoughtful. "And yes, I know about the robbery. Mick told me the whole story before he died." Noah could barely breathe. "He told you?" "In confidence, yes. But Mick's been gone 3 years now, and sometimes the truth needs to see daylight." The priest stood and began walking deeper into the memorial garden. "Follow me. There's something else you should see." They stopped in front of a small memorial wall listing donors to the church's community outreach programs. Near the bottom, Noah spotted a familiar name. Anonymous donations coordinated by M. Grady, 1985 to 2018. Every month for 33 years. Father Sullivan explained. Mick brought us an envelope of cash. Never less than $500, sometimes more. He said it came from people who wanted to make amends but couldn't do it publicly. Amends for what? For hurting people. For taking things that weren't theirs. For letting fear keep them quiet when they should have spoken up. The priest looked directly at Noah. The money funded our victim assistance program, our job training center, our emergency fund for families in crisis. Noah's mind raced. Did he say who the donors were? He never gave names, but I had my suspicions. Men who'd clearly done wrong in their past, trying to balance the scales without destroying the lives they'd built afterward. Father Sullivan paused. Including your grandfather. Grandpa was sending money here? I believe so, yes. The amounts always increased after Thomas visited Mick. They had a complicated relationship, guilt and gratitude all mixed together. Mick felt responsible for getting Thomas involved in the robbery in the first place. Wait, Noah said, confusion flooding his voice. I thought Jimmy Torino recruited my grandfather. Father Sullivan shook his head. According to Mick, it was the other way around. Mick brought the job to Jimmy, but they needed a clean driver. Mick suggested Thomas because he knew him from the neighborhood, knew he was desperate for money with a baby on the way. The revelation hit Noah like a punch to the gut. His grandfather hadn't just been a reluctant getaway driver. He'd been specifically recruited by someone who knew his situation, knew he could be manipulated. But Mick tried to make it right. The priest continued. After the robbery went bad, after the violence, he spent the rest of his life trying to undo the damage. The Victim Assistance Fund helped dozens of families over the years. People who'd been hurt by crimes, who couldn't afford medical bills or lost wages. Including Robert Martinez? Father Sullivan looked surprised. You know about Robert? Yes, actually. Though he never knew where the help was coming from. We arranged for anonymous payments to cover his physical therapy, help his family with groceries during the worst months. Mick insisted on that, said Martinez's suffering was on all of them. Noah sat down heavily on the memorial bench, overwhelmed by the complexity of what he was learning. The story wasn't as simple as he thought. There had been consequences, but there had also been attempts at redemption. Secret acts of charity funded by guilty consciences. The others? Noah asked weakly. Jimmy, Pete, Marcus, did they contribute too? Some did, some didn't. Marcus died in prison in 1978, never contributed a penny. Jimmy sent money sporadically from California, but stopped after a few years. Pete. The priest frowned. Pete was the most surprising. After he moved to Florida, he became quite successful in construction. Sent substantial amounts every Christmas until he died in 2015. So they all knew about this? This secret charity? Mick coordinated it all. Said it was the only way any of them could sleep at night. Father Sullivan stood to leave. Your grandfather was one of the most consistent contributors, Noah. Whatever else happened that night, he spent 50 years trying to make amends. As the priest walked away, Noah remained on the bench, staring at the memorial plaque. The men who had committed the robbery hadn't just disappeared into the night. Some of them had stayed, had tried in their own quiet way to repair the damage they'd caused. But was money enough? Could stolen cash be transformed into something good through charity? Or was it still just blood money, no matter how it was spent? Noah pulled out his phone and took a picture of the memorial wall, then the bench, then the brass plaque. Evidence of a secret history of guilt and attempted redemption. Evidence that changed everything he thought he knew about his family's story. Noah burst through the front door that evening, his mind reeling with everything Father Sullivan had told him. The lockbox sat on the kitchen counter where he'd left it that morning, But now it seemed less like evidence of a crime and more like a piece of a larger, more complicated puzzle. His mother was at the stove, stirring pasta sauce and humming softly. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal after everything he'd learned. "Mom, where's Grandpa?" "In the living room, watching the news." "How was your day, honey? You've been spending a lot of time at the library lately." Noah ignored the question. "I need to talk to both of you. Together. Now." Sarah turned from the stove, noting the intensity in her son's voice. "Noah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way, I have." Noah picked up the lockbox, its weight familiar now in his hands. "Mom, there's something about this house, about our family, that you need to know." "What are you talking about?" "Just please. Come sit down. Both of you." 5 minutes later, Sarah sat on the couch between Noah and Thomas, her face pale with growing concern. The lockbox lay open on the coffee table, its contents spread across the surface like evidence at a trial. "I don't understand," Sarah said, picking up the yellowed newspaper clipping. "What does this old robbery have to do with us?" Noah looked at his grandfather, giving him one last chance to tell the story himself. Thomas met his gaze, then slowly shook his head. "He can't do it," Noah said quietly. "So I will." For the next 20 minutes, Noah laid out everything: the robbery, Thomas's role as the getaway driver, the blood money that had bought their house, the decades of guilt and secret donations to the church. His mother's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, a kind of hollow shock. When Noah finished, the living room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. "This isn't real," Sarah whispered finally. "This can't be real." "I'm sorry," Thomas said, his voice barely audible. "Sarah, I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Sorry? Dad, you're telling me that my entire life has been built on stolen money? That this house, my childhood, everything I thought I knew about our family is a lie?" "It's not all a lie," Noah interjected. "Mom, listen." "No!" Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "No, I can't listen to any more of this. My father is a criminal. My house was bought with blood money. My son learned the truth before I did." She spun around to face Thomas. "How could you keep this from me for 43 years? Thomas looked older than Noah had ever seen him, sunken into his chair like he was disappearing. "Because I love you. Because telling you would have destroyed everything good we built together." "You mean everything good you built with stolen money?" "Yes," Thomas said simply. "I know how it sounds. I know how wrong it was. But Sarah, that money kept you alive. It paid for the hospital when you were born, when there were complications. It gave us a home, stability, a future." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "And what about Robert Martinez's future? What about his family?" Noah's heart jumped. "You remember his name?" "I remember everything you just told me," Sarah snapped. "A man was shot, lost his career, lost his house, because my father drove the getaway car. But he was helped too," Noah said urgently. "Mom, that's what I learned today. Grandpa and the others, they've been sending money to the church for decades. Anonymous donations that help crime victims, including Martinez. They've been trying to make it right." Sarah stared at him. "Make it right? How do you make something like this right?" "Maybe you can't," Thomas said quietly. "Maybe you just try, every day for the rest of your life, to be better than the person you were that night." "I can't process this." Sarah sank back onto the couch, her head in her hands. "The contractors are coming back tomorrow to start the renovation. We're going to use income from this house to pay for Noah's education. How can I do that now, knowing where it all came from? Because it's not just stolen money anymore," Noah said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "Mom, think about it. Grandpa used $15,000 of stolen money to buy this house in 1972. But since then, he's probably sent 3 times that amount to help crime victims. The house has been paid for twice over with money from honest work, with rental income, with mortgage payments from Grandpa's legitimate job. Sarah looked up at her son. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe the answer isn't to tear everything down. Maybe it's to keep building on what Grandpa started. Noah turned to Thomas. You said Mick Grady spent 30 years trying to make amends. What if we kept doing that? What if we used the rental income, not just for my school, but to help people who've been hurt by crimes? Like a charitable foundation? Sarah asked slowly. Not that formal. Just quiet help. The way Grandpa's been doing it all along, but bigger. More organized. Noah felt the idea taking shape as he spoke. We could set aside half the rental income every month. Send it to victim assistance programs, family crisis funds, organizations that help people rebuild their lives. Thomas was staring at his grandson with something that might have been pride. You'd do that? Even knowing what I did? Grandpa, what you did was wrong. But what you've been doing since then, that's not wrong. That's trying to balance the scales. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, she looked at her father. How much have you sent to the church over the years? About $200,000, give or take. More in recent years, when I could afford it. $200,000. Sarah shook her head. Dad, that's more than the house is worth. It could never be enough. No, Sarah agreed. It couldn't. But it's something. She turned to Noah. You really think we should keep the house? Use it to help others? I think selling it and trying to return money to people who might not even be alive anymore won't undo what happened. But using it to prevent other families from going through what the Martinezes went through, that might actually do some good. Sarah stood and walked to the fireplace, where family photos lined the mantel. Pictures of birthdays, graduations, holidays, all of them taken in this house, all of them part of a legacy built on blood money but sustained by love and guilt and the desperate desire to make amends. There's one condition, she said finally. No more secrets. If we're going to do this, if we're going to turn our family's shame into something constructive, we do it honestly. No more buried boxes, no more hidden truths. Noah looked at his grandfather, who nodded slowly. And, Sarah continued, we find a way to tell Robert Martinez what happened. If he's still alive, if we can locate him, he deserves to know that the people who hurt him have spent 50 years trying to make it right. Even if it means Grandpa could go to jail? Sarah's voice was steady. Even then. The three of them sat in silence, bound together by truth and secrets, and the weight of choices made long before Noah was born. Outside, the sun was setting behind the trees that Thomas had planted with stolen money 30 years ago. But maybe, Noah thought, it was time to let them grow towards something better. 1 year later, Noah stood in the same backyard where everything had started, but the garden looked completely different. Where the old, crumbling bed had been, Sarah had planted a memorial garden, white roses for remembrance, purple lavender for healing, and a small Japanese maple that would grow stronger each year. The basement renovation had been completed 6 months ago, and their tenant, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a retired nurse who baked cookies for Noah and helped Thomas with his physical therapy exercises. The rental income came to exactly $1,100 per month, and true to their agreement, $550 went into what they privately named the Second Chances Fund. Noah had started his sophomore year at the local public high school after all, turning down the private school acceptance his mother had worked so hard to secure. Instead, he'd applied for and won a merit scholarship to the district's honors program, something he'd earned entirely on his own merits, with no blood money involved. The lockbox was gone, burned in a small ceremony the previous fall with Father Sullivan's blessing. But the lessons it had taught them remained. Noah! Sarah called from the back porch. He's here! Noah's stomach clenched with nervous excitement. After months of searching through online directories, social media, and public records, they'd finally located Robert Martinez. He was 76 now, living in a retirement community in Arizona with his wife of 52 years. His daughter, the baby mentioned in the 1972 newspaper article, was now a successful doctor in Phoenix. When Sarah had finally found the courage to call him, explaining carefully who she was and why she was reaching out. Robert had been silent for a long time. Then he'd said something that had surprised them all. I wondered if this day would ever come. Now he was here, having flown in specifically to meet the family whose secret had shaped both their lives. Thomas sat in his wheelchair on the patio. His arthritis had worsened over the past year, but Noah suspected the physical decline had more to do with finally releasing 50 years of buried stress. When he saw Robert Martinez walking through the back gate, leaning slightly on a cane but moving with quiet dignity, Thomas's hands began to shake. Robert was smaller than Noah had imagined, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone's grandfather, which Noah realized he probably was. Thomas, Robert said simply, stopping a few feet away from the wheelchair. Bobby, Thomas replied, his voice cracking. You got old. So did you. Robert smiled, and some of the tension in the air eased. Took you long enough to find me. I didn't know if you'd want to be found. After what we did to you. What you did to me was wrong, Robert said, settling into the patio chair Sarah had placed nearby. But I've had 50 years to think about it, and I know desperation when I see it. I was desperate too back then. That's why I took the security job, needed the money with a new baby. Noah stepped forward. Mr. Martinez, I'm Noah. I'm the one who found the box. Robert studied him carefully. You look like your grandfather did at your age. But you've got your mother's eyes, clearer, I think. Less troubled. I want you to know, Noah said, his voice steadier than he felt. We never forgot about you. None of us. And we've been trying to make it right. Your priest friend, Father Sullivan, told me about the donations over the years. Anonymous help with medical bills, groceries, even college tuition for my daughter when she was applying to medical school. Robert's voice grew quiet. I always wondered where that help came from. Part of me suspected, but I never wanted to know for sure. Sarah sat down across from him. We can't give you back what was taken. We can't undo the injury, the career you lost, the house you had to give up. But we want to keep trying to balance the scales. Robert was quiet for a moment, looking around the garden, the house, the evidence of the life that had been built with money stolen from his family's future. You know what's funny? He said finally. That money you took, it was going to be used to buy Christmas bonuses for the factory workers. Poor families, mostly, people working double shifts to make ends meet. When the robbery happened, those families didn't get their bonuses that year. The revelation hit Noah like a physical blow. It wasn't just Robert who had been hurt. It was dozens of families, maybe hundreds. But, Robert continued, some of those same families were helped by the church's Victim Assistance Fund over the years. Money that came from your donations. It's strange how these things circle around. Thomas leaned forward in his wheelchair. Bobby, I need you to know, I think about that night every single day. I see your face in every news story about robbery victims. I hear your name in every confession I've ever made. If I could go back. But you can't, Robert said gently. None of us can. The question is, what do we do with the time we have left? Sarah pulled out a folder she'd been holding. We've set up a formal fund. Half of our rental income, plus additional money when we can manage it, goes to help families affected by violent crimes. We've already helped 12 families this year with medical bills, job training, emergency housing. And, Noah added, we're looking into setting up a scholarship program for kids whose parents were hurt in crimes, to help them get the education their families might not otherwise afford. Robert opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. This is more than making amends, he said after a while. This is building something new. It's what Grandpa should have done from the beginning, Noah said. Instead of hiding his guilt, he should have found a way to turn it into action. I was too much of a coward, Thomas admitted. But Noah, he's braver than I ever was. Robert stood and walked to the memorial garden, touching the brass plaque they'd installed on a small stone. For those who tried to make things right. This is beautiful, he said. Simple, but honest. Would you? Sarah hesitated. Would you like to add something? Your name, or your family's name? Some acknowledgement of what happened to you? Robert shook his head. No. This isn't about victims and criminals anymore. It's about people trying to be better than they were. He turned back to face them. Besides, I think the best memorial isn't written on a stone, it's written in the lives you help going forward. As the afternoon sun filtered through the Japanese maple, four people sat together in a garden built on the site of buried secrets. They talked about the families they'd helped, the scholarship fund they were planning, and the small ways that guilt could be transformed into grace. When Robert finally left, he hugged each of them, even Thomas, who cried openly for the first time since Noah had found the lockbox. That evening, as Noah helped his grandfather navigate the wheelchair ramp into the house, Thomas grabbed his arm. "Thank you," the old man said. "For what?" "For digging up that box. For having the courage to tell the truth. For showing me that secrets don't have to stay buried forever." Noah looked back at the garden, where the memorial plaque caught the last rays of sunlight. Tomorrow, he would help his mother review applications for their next round of assistance grants. Next week, he would volunteer at the church's job training program. Next month, he would start working on college essays that would honestly describe how finding his family's buried shame had taught him the difference between guilt and responsibility. The box was gone, but its lessons lived on, not as a burden to be carried, but as a foundation for building something better. And for the first time in 51 years, Thomas Brennan slept without nightmares.